Today, I wanted to talk about how Behaviour can improve the direction of Dead by Daylight by radically rebalancing their game. I understand this is unlikely to happen, but I want to open up discussion and generate new ideas for the community. I hope to make this video the first part of a series, and I wanted to start off by addressing the elephant in the room, Moris and Keys. While Behaviour has recently nerfed Moris, they should be more ambitious in standardizing these mechanics to make them fun and rewarding, rather than frustrating and overpowered. As you watch this video, bear in mind that I'm trying to balance around the idea of fun, active gameplay, and especially interaction between the killer and survivors. You may disagree with the points, and that's fine. These are optional changes, and I'm flexible in modifying my ideas based on better solutions. Like many in the community, however, I'm frustrated with the current balance, and I personally find a lot of these gameplay mechanics boring and stalling. One of the biggest reasons for stress for each role, Keys and Moris are almost universally regarded as bad in their current iteration. On the survivor side, Moris allow killers to effectively take away 2 of your 3 lives, force you to play incredibly safe, and significantly reduce your team's chances of escape if even one survivor gets killed early. On the killer side, Keys add a way to cheese the game, create unnecessarily long standoffs, encourage tunneling, and, if used, force killers into the endgame collapse should they correctly close the hatch. This issue creates undue stress for both sides. Killers often bring high-end add-ons when they use Moris, and playing against a Mori encourages survivors to leave their teammates hooked for as long as possible. Likewise, 2 survivors can escape after their teammates are killed, with 2 gens remaining, circumventing a strong killer performance. Behaviour should look to rework both these mechanics so neither side can hold the game hostage. Killer time management is critical, and worrying about hatch placement or key usage feels unfair, especially to lower ranked killers. For survivors, Moris are too easy to obtain with too little counterplay. Further, survivors' inability to discern the rarity of Moris before the match gives killers a huge advantage with no downside. Killers may force survivors to unhook less frequently or waste pallets more frequently because these survivors have to assume the Mori is ebony. With these reworked mechanics, there will be cascading effects to the core gameplay. I will have videos on other balance opportunities Behaviour could make to address these changes, but in this video specifically, I will look at how reworking Keys warrants the removal of the hatch. While a fun idea in principle, the hatch primarily wastes time and prolongs games. The Mori rework. Moris are now passive and can be used on a survivor after 2 unique hooks, or on the last survivor, regardless of number of hooks. Moris ruin the gameplay experience for survivors, encounter some of the most dangerous perks like Decisive Strike and Unbreakable, and that way they also promote tunneling off the hook, especially considering how valuable eliminating a survivor can be. With the recent proposed nerf to Moris in bug fix patch 4.41, Behaviour seems to know this issue is a pressing concern for the player base. While requiring a second hook is a good feature, this prerequisite does not adequately penalize proxying or camping survivors. If a killer forces the struggle phase, they can still tunnel the survivor off the hook and kill them immediately. Behaviour should be looking to avoid situations where one player's experience is that negatively impacted. As such, I propose that Moris should become passives and activate after a survivor's second unique hook. This change solves multiple problems with how Moris currently work, and how passive Moris could theoretically be overpowered. First, the requirement for unique hooks disincentivizes proxying, and eliminates all situations where a survivor would be eliminated after their first hook, regardless of whether they hit the struggle phase or not. Moris would then be regarded as a reward for getting multiple hooks, switching targets, and dominating the match. Survivors may be worried about the reduced opportunity for DS, but these strict requirements largely keep the perk's power intact, while adding counterplay and tension towards the endgame. Further, the ability to Mori after 2 unique hooks removes a lot of unfun situations from the game. For example, some dead zones or map spawns prevent you from being able to carry survivors to hooks. Towards the endgame, survivors can then crawl into a corner where hooks have been used to force death by timeout, or a free wiggle off. Wasting time is not particularly fun or engaging, and this change would eliminate these situations, especially when it's the last survivor. Finally, the standardization of Moris would eliminate the constant roller coaster difficulty match to match. The extreme situations with ebony Moris would be entirely removed, and a stable set of rules governing Moris would lead to less frustration for survivors. After time, this standardization might also open more interesting counterplay and reduce the need to radically rebalance perks. For example, in going back to DS, a lot of killers remain frustrated because DS triggers and lockers. With a passive Mori, that function serves a purpose and has counterplay, adding tension and, hopefully, not seeming as overpowered. Key rework idea. Keys should work on doors with a 3-second animation, interruptible, but progress is retained. To balance this change, the endgame collapse can begin when the last generator is powered. Keys represent a frustrating circumvention of normal Dead by Daylight gameplay. With a key, a survivor can ignore their primary objective, leading to less interaction with the killer and more selfish behavior. For example, if the killer is performing well, survivors with keys may prioritize hiding and/or finding the hatch, sometimes at the expense of their teammates. As the game progresses then, keys can slow down the pacing substantially. On the other side of things, keys present difficult options for killers. At red ranks, killers should correctly prioritize survivors with keys once the hatch spawns to avoid multiple escapes. This strategy actually promotes tunneling, and even if the survivor does die, their teammates can pick up the key and use it later. At lower ranks, killers may feel bullied by constant key escapes, leading to more frustration and more ebony Moris. The problem with the key then is not that it allows survivors to escape, but that it allows them to escape early, essentially beginning the endgame collapse. As such, letting keys work only on doors would solve both of these problems. Keys would no longer allow early exits, and with a less threatening item, would create less incentive to eliminate the key holder from the killer's perspective. Further, keys would then be seen as a reward for completing gens, redirecting player behavior towards active participation in normal gameplay. With the ability for keys to work on doors, however, the endgame collapse would need to be tweaked slightly. As it stands currently, this mechanic already has several persistent problems. For example, survivors typically 99 doors, allowing them easy escapes once they remove killer pressure through group healing or unhooks. By not opening the doors, moreover, they can take their time, plan strategies, and play much more passively. Without a timer then, the killer has little pressure once they themselves down or hook a survivor. Once a survivor preps a door, there is no way to prevent it from being opened. As such, a killer's best option can frequently be to face camp a hook survivor, leading to a frustrating and boring endgame experience. Thus, the endgame collapse should start immediately upon the completion of all generators. This change helps slot the key as a niche, helpful item. With the added pressure of a timer, keys can help survivors escape without being overpowered. Additionally, this change also encourages a much more active, fun playstyle for both the killer and survivors. Survivors now have to think about when they should pop the last generator and can't cheese out the game. And killers have more options and pressure once they lose the last generator. Importantly, behavior shouldn't create an environment where the killer wants to lose generators. Rather, it should aim to create an environment where losing the last generator isn't an immediate loss condition. Currently, survivors have too much power with DS, adrenaline, and keys when the generators are powered. With a timer, the game can inject much needed tension while balancing perks like NOED more appropriately. Finally, killers can actually pressure doors without the experience feeling pointless, leading to less frequent camping and more dynamic interaction. Hatch rework. The hatch is eliminated from all trials. Our rework for keys takes their strength away from hatches and rebalances them around the endgame. With that in mind, behavior can revisit the hatch as an option and consider removing it from the game. Why eliminate the hatch? Escaping through the hatch while on the ground, as the killer desperately tries to find you, can be a thrilling, fun experience. Giving the last player alive a chance to escape is a worthy attempt at balancing around the idea of fun. These goals should be lauded, but in the case of the hatch, they are not how the mechanic plays out the majority of the time. What happens in game is the hatch standoff. Everyone is familiar with this mechanic, and in too many different contexts, the standoff promotes taking the game hostage, not playing to win, and behaving selfishly. Behavior should promote active choices and active gameplay, eliminating passive tactics that stall out matches. On the survivor side, certain players will leave their teammates on the ground and hide, sometimes until their teammates completely bleed out. It's an unfun situation where the downed survivor has no opportunity to play the game because their teammates have chosen self-preservation. While that choice may be correct in certain contexts, the hatch promotes selfish behavior too early. For example, in situations where there are two survivors left alive, what incentivizes either player to work on generators? If you're around generators, you're more likely to be found by the killer, and thus at a disadvantage. If the hatch is already spawned, there is even less incentive to work on generators. Why choose the objective when you can let your teammate die and escape? The hatch then, like the key, incorrectly rewards survivors for passive gameplay and avoiding the objective. On the killer's side, survivors can hold the game hostage in an attempt to get the hatch. If they refuse to do their objective, then patrolling gens offers no information, and trying to find survivors, especially without perks like whispers, becomes increasingly boring or frustrating. Further, lack of progress on generators can force killers to abandon their patrols altogether and start random searches. If the killer lacks mobility, these searches can last too long and negatively impact the player experience. Altogether, the amount of interactions between sides drop dramatically, and the game becomes a complete stalemate until the killer downs a survivor. If the killer wants a 4K, the process will just repeat itself. Once one survivor remains, the hatch standoff is even more boring, and is mostly a luck-based mechanic that adds too much dead time. For example, if the hatch hadn't previously spawned, then the survivor and killer will run around the map, sometimes for minutes, trying to find it. The killer does have a slight advantage over the survivor, but the random spawn doesn't feel rewarding, and doesn't involve any interaction. It's just a random search that leaves one side feeling mildly frustrated. If the survivor tries to circumvent the hatch and camps near a door, the reverse standoff, then the gameplay is still boring and luck-based. The killer either waits near the hatch and baits the survivor, wasting a ton of time, or closes the hatch and only has a 50-50 chance to choose the correct door, depending on spawns of course. The devs have recently released offerings which predetermine where the hatch spawns, hinting that they recognize the problem with this RNG element. This standard spawn location, however, only makes keys better. On the killer side, the hatch promotes slugging in an attempt to 4K. While some killers freely give the hatch, others may prioritize getting kills. If that's the case, the killer will frequently leave survivors down for extended periods of time, hoping to either find the last survivor or force them to heal their teammate. In cases where a survivor is DC'd, or multiple survivors have, a killer may have to get all other kills to avoid an entity displeased performance post-game. While this is not a serious or big deal, Behaviour should always try to avoid nudging players into this way of thinking. Removing the hatch prevents the stallout on the killer, and as I'll explain shortly, Behaviour can still offer options for the last survivor that are both more efficient and fun. These changes aren't perfect on their own. While I think the Mori change is the least objectionable, the changes to the endgame collapse and the hatch may have unintended consequences. Behaviour can anticipate these problems and put out solutions to prevent even worse tactics from forming. 1. Killers camping doors, slugging to 4Ks during the endgame. In my suggested change to the endgame, I didn't consider the possibility of killers cheesing the game using the timer against survivors, especially camping near doors. Behaviour could alleviate this tactic by placing door locations opposite each other on the map. If a killer caps one door, survivors can split pressure and escape. Behavior could also consider halting the timer if a killer spends too much time near the door while not in chase. Likewise, they could flat increase the speed at which survivors open doors, or dynamically increase that speed depending on whether the killer is in chase. 2. No escape for last survivors. The change to the hatch may seem counterintuitive and overly harsh. Why should Behavior make a change that makes it less likely for the last survivor to escape? To address this frustration, Behavior could revert back to previous patches when the hatch required a certain amount of generators to be completed, and this way, survivors would be rewarded an escape opportunity by focusing on their objective as a team. Unfortunately, that means survivors who don't complete generators won't have a chance to escape. Killers, however, should be rewarded for protecting their generators and dominating a match. In situations where DCs and snowballs happen, giving survivors extra escape opportunities enables poor behavior. DCs should never help a survivor escape, and killer snowballs should punish survivors who performed poorly. In a more efficient solution, Behavior could simply begin the endgame collapse once the third survivor dies. There could be a generator completion prerequisite, or there could not be. Either way, the timer would create pressure, avoid long showdowns, and at the very least, decrease the randomness by making the choice a 50-50. Finally, as a more active solution, Behavior could toy with something called the final chase. Once the third survivor dies, the killer might be notified of the survivor's location via a constant killer instinct. The killer would then have to initiate a chase in a specified time, or lose. Once the chase started, killer instinct would stop, and the survivor could win if they escaped or survived long enough. This solution feels a little janky, and would have to be more developed to avoid exploits. On the one hand, killers should be the initiator given their role. On the other hand, though, this makes them vulnerable to survivors who run to strong setups. Regardless, this change makes the survivor or killer earn their escape or kill and creates a showdown to end trials. As an added bonus, if a killer wants the survivor to escape, they can simply give up chase and avoid the tedious process of looking for hatch. 3. Incentivizing gen work in a losing match. Making these changes will hopefully incentivize more team-based behavior for survivors, and more split pressure from killers. However, in situations where survivors are very clearly losing, what incentivizes them to continue with the match and work on generators? If you tie potential escape to generator completion, that might help in some cases. In extreme cases, however, behavior should look at increasing base repair speed per player killed. I have a future video that goes into generator speeds more specifically, but this change could help by redistributing power to the remaining survivors and allowing matches to remain competitive despite early deaths. 4. Letting survivors escape. If the killer wants the survivor to escape, they can simply open a door themselves and push them out the exit gates. Behavior can remove penalties to killers under the gatekeeper section if they open the door themselves. Conclusion. Where do we go from here? It's unlikely the developers will make radical changes like the ones I outlined. Unfortunately, they are prioritizing DLC release dates and monetization over gameplay health and fun, and that's the real disappointment, because Dead by Daylight could be a fun and balanced game. If the developers lean into the aspects the player base enjoys, chases, hook saves, tension, then they can create an active experience that both killers and survivors will enjoy. If they rework Moris, behavior disincentivizes killers to bring the best add-ons and play super sweaty or sleazy. If they rework Keys, behavior focuses survivors on their objective and removes selfless temptations. If they remove the hatch and tweak the endgame collapse, behavior can remove dead time and inject tension. By focusing on gameplay balance and health, the developers could nudge the gameplay experience in a much more positive direction. They would be removing all the extreme, boring, or unfun situations that frustrate the community. No killer enjoys multiple key escapes. No survivor enjoys being tunneled and moried, and no survivor enjoys seeing their teammate play for the hatch. If these situations no longer exist, maybe players could start having more fun. And really, that's the whole point, isn't it? Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy this sort of content, Feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, or pitch your own changes for Dead by Daylight in the comments below. Enjoy your day, and I hope to see everyone in the fog.